Welcome, everybody, and thank you for participating and viewing our coordinated entry training, April 2022. This is a very important training, and we want you to listen and take notes, and feel free to review it again if you like. The coordinated entry system is what I like to consider the heart and soul of what we do in our COC. Through the coordinated entry system, we identify families and individuals who are homeless and that need to be housed. We enter them into our system, and then we refer them. It's a very important part of what we do. The important things with coordinated entry is that if individuals are not entered in correctly, then we can't house them. We can't help them. And that's why we felt it was very important for us to have this training for folks to review over and over again. So feel free to take notes. Again, feel free to review this training as often as you like and as new staff enter your organization. But we'll start our training now. Thank you all.
So what is homelessness and how does HUD define homelessness? HUD has 4 categories of homelessness. The first one is someone who's sleeping in a place not meant for human habitation, like a storage unit or a park bench. The second one is someone who is at risk of homelessness, who will be at risk of homelessness within 14 days. This is important because in order for an individual to fall under this category, they must be at risk with absolutely no resources for housing. The third category are youth under 25 who don't meet any of the other categories of homelessness and have not had a lease, or who have moved 2 or more times in the last 2 months and will most likely continue to face barriers to housing. And the last category, category 4, is an individual fleeing domestic violence. What I want to highlight in this slide is that category 1 is the only category eligible for COC housing. And also we've included a graphic on the side of this slide in order to give a visual as to the 4 categories of homelessness. Next slide, please. And what is HMIS? By now you're at this training because you want to learn how to use HMIS and coordinated entry, or you're already in there and you just need a refresher. So HMIS stands for Homelessness Management Information System. This is the database that we use to record and keep track of client information in order to help our homeless clients locate fair housing in the best way possible. This is the database in which coordinated entry is located. And in order to gain access to HMIS, you'll have to speak with your organization administrator, as well as Daniel Gore, our HMIS administrator, in order to gain access to this system. Thank you.
Purpose of coordinated entry. The purpose of coordinated entry is to create a single door that no matter where a person experiencing homelessness enters our system, they are able to access housing in a fair and equitable manner. In other words, it doesn't matter whether they come in through their local DO, through DSS, or they come in through a drop-in shelter, or they come in through a street outreach worker or other origin point that connects to our system, they will still be assessed the same. And when they meet the criteria for a housing program, they will be referred, no matter where they are or who they're connected to. It's our most important tool in obtaining housing for our clients. Coordinated entry is more fair because each person or household is helped in priority order based on how long they've been homeless and the specific challenges of their situation while experiencing homelessness. What organization they connect to first doesn't matter. They get the same result in the end. That's the goal of the system. However, the system only works if all of the agencies serving people experiencing homelessness in Westchester County are using the system in the same way and providing high quality data when they input and enroll clients into HMIS. That's where we really need to make sure that our system isn't a barrier in someone's homeless experience. We want it to be a helpful tool to them and not another place at which, a mischecked box or typo or other error while using the system doesn't create a barrier for them to access a housing program where they meet the criteria. So that's what we're talking about here today, the why and how of coordinated entry. As part of prioritizing people who are experiencing homelessness for housing availability, we use the chat. The chat is the Westchester Comprehensive Homelessness Assessment Tool. It's for people who are already experiencing homelessness and their families to be able to access housing openings within our COC. Combined with the length of time that a person has been homeless, it will determine their place on the coordinated entry housing prioritization list. Prioritization lists are broken down further based on the criteria for the specific housing programs we have. For example, someone who served in the United States Armed Forces may be eligible for a program specifically for veterans. So when we're looking at our prioritization list, we're going to be looking at veterans compared with other veterans. There are two types of housing that our COC provides. One is permanent supportive housing. You'll hear it referred to as PSH. This is a subsidy for an unlimited amount of time, even a lifetime amount of time for people who have a documented disability. A disability can be a physical or medical limitation, a mental health related disability, or a substance use related disability. All are considered equal and valid as long as it can be documented by a professional who is licensed to diagnose and treat that condition. We'll talk more later about how to document a disability. Rapid rehousing. Rapid rehousing, we prioritize folks a bit differently. They're prioritized on the basis of how ready they are to be able to pay rent and be self-sufficient within the next 1 to 2 years. It's temporary rental assistance, and it's more of a shallow subsidy, usually several $100s to a few $100s, for people who will be able to pay the rent on their own within 12 to 24 months with some sort of other assistance or intervention. We see a lot of our programs also have an employment assistance component to them so that the folks in those programs can graduate from those programs and be independent, self-sufficient, and end their homelessness and graduate, move on. We were asked the last time that we gave this training about people who lose their rapid rehousing apartment. If it's the apartment that is lost, then that client can be moved to another apartment within the same program. If the client leaves the program entirely and returns to the shelter or returns to unsheltered homelessness, that client can and is still eligible for rapid rehousing and can either resume or they can be re-referred. They're eligible for up to 24 months of rapid rehousing assistance within the past 36 months. So if a person hasn't gotten to that 24 months, it means they're still able and eligible to receive rapid rehousing services, even if it's for a shorter period of time.
As Craig and Allison were just discussing, only clients that are enrolled in coordinated entry can be referred to permanent housing. Therefore, it is most important to ensure that all clients are enrolled into coordinated entry as soon as possible. 24-hour emergency shelters, including all family shelters and also shelters serving single adults, are required to enroll all clients into coordinated entry within 24 hours of the first night that they reside in the emergency shelter. Similarly, homeless outreach workers are required to enroll all clients into coordinated entry within 24 hours of their first outreach contact with that particular client. Drop-in shelters serve a large population that is very transient, that goes through our system for only a single-digit number of days and are never seen again. And so to reduce the burden in our system of enrolling clients that don't need housing resources, we only enroll drop-in clients that have been in the system for 14 or more nights within the past 12 months. But within 24 hours after that 14th night, anywhere in a Westchester shelter, drop-in shelter staff are required to enroll that particular client into coordinated entry. Our HMIS software, Client Track, allows drop-in shelter staff to monitor the number of nights within the last 12 months that all clients have resided in drop-in shelters. On the current enrollment screen, one can filter clients for coordinated entry, no, but 14 plus nights, yes. All clients that show up with those two filters must be enrolled into coordinated entry immediately because they fulfill this requirement. They are a drop-in shelter resident that has 14 stays but is not yet enrolled. Next slide.
As the coordinated entry assessor, you will have many responsibilities. Your role as the CE assessor is very important because you're the initial contact person for this entire coordinated entry process. You're responsible for completing all HMIS assessments, which include completing the chat and collecting and uploading all assessment-related documents. This could be, but it's not limited to, homeless, disability, and income verifications. Once all assessments are completed and the referral is made, the CE assessor responsibility is to notify their client of their eligibility and their referral status. Next slide. As the coordinated entry assessor, you are the point person and the main link between your client and the housing provider. When a referral is made by the coordinated entry staff, you're responsible for contacting the housing provider in a timely manner. Your collaboration with the housing provider is vital because it ensures that your client's housing needs are being met. During this process, it's very important to make sure that all HMIS assessments are completed in its entirety and that all documents are uploaded and all the information is in HMIS is up to date until the client is housed. Next slide. In summary, when your client is referred into a program through coordinated entry, the CE assessor must respond to the referral email within 2 business days, notify the client that a referral is made, provide the housing provider with any additional documentation that's requested, coordinate all meetings between the client and the housing provider, and continue to communicate with the housing provider and other care coordinators in order to assist the client to transition into housing. Please feel free to contact Coordinated Entry Administrator Jo Marie Tarshun to resolve any issues during the referral process. Thank you.
Scope of service regarding the coordinated entry contract. Some organizations are contracted with the Department of Social Services to provide these services on our coordinated entry contract. Other organizations have a coordinated assessor that are the point person, as previously discussed, to ensure documentations are collected and that clients are entered into coordinated entry. Responsibilities include attending monthly COC provider meetings held by the grantees of various programs, whether it's DSS, DCMH, the City of Mount Vernon, or Municipal Housing Authority of Yonkers. Attend quarterly coordinated entry group meetings as well as mandatory trainings. Attend monthly case conference meetings. These includes our coordinated entry permanent supportive housing meetings, as previously discussed, as well as our coordinated entry rapid rehousing meetings. When a client you're serving has been in any of also the Patriot Housing meetings, which is also for veterans or clients who've been in any form of the U.S. Armed Forces for any period of time, as well as our DV resource meetings for individuals who've experienced domestic violence. Be prepared to actively participate in these meetings. Remember, as the coordinated entry assessor or the person designated by your agency to meet this need, you're advocating for your client's rights. If you are not sure when these meetings taking place, please visit our COC website at the website listed on this page. Next slide. Core elements of coordinated entry. As previously discussed, coordinated entry provides access. We talked previously about access points that people can go, individuals can go who are experiencing homelessness, whether it's the district office, whether it's a shelter, whether it's an outreach worker. Assessment, we talked also about the chats, what is used to gather information to determine what disabilities and what the needs are of a particular individual. Then prioritization. How do we fairly prioritize those individuals who are in need of service? And thankfully, that process is done through our HMIS coordinated entry system. Then referral. Once the prioritization is completed, then we're ready for referral. Referrals primarily happen through our coordinated entry assessor here at DSS. I'm sorry, our coordinated entry administrator here at DSS, Jo Marie Tarshun, and they're referred for the various housing that they might qualify for. But again, it's important to reiterate at this point that if the information is not entered correctly, if there are documentations that are missing in the HMIS system, then we cannot refer somebody to housing that they would need in order to be self-sufficient. Thank you.
As Craig previously mentioned, a client can be enrolled into coordinated entry at the following locations that are also listed on the slide. These are DSS district offices, emergency shelters, drop-ins, as well as via street outreach workers who are responsible for providing outreach services to individuals who are living in vehicles and in other places not intended for habitation throughout Westchester County. On this slide, we provided the links. Step 2 of the process is assessment. After enrolling a client into coordinated entry, they are assessed based on various factors, including the time spent homeless as well as their disability. There are 3 criteria to meet the requirement of chronic homelessness. The first is someone who is homeless with a disability and lives in a place not meant for human habitation, a safe haven, or an emergency shelter. Someone who has been living in an institutional facility, such as a jail or substance abuse or mental health treatment facility, or a hospital for fewer than 90 days or 3 months. And number 3 is a family with an adult as the head of the household who satisfies the criteria in paragraphs 1 or 2. The link to the form required to verify homelessness is located on our COC website, which the link is provided on the slide. Next slide, please. The second key element of coordinated entry of the assessment part is the disability. So besides chronic homelessness that I just mentioned, having a disability is another qualifier in obtaining housing through coordinated entry. Having a disability can mean several things to all of us. However, as per HUD, a disability is considered a diagnosable substance abuse disorder, a serious mental illness such as schizophrenia, a developmental disability such as cerebral palsy, and the disability will be of long continuation and the client will live with it indefinitely, and it will affect the client's ability to live independently. Thank you.
So what qualifies as verification of disability? This is one of our most frequently asked questions. Any one of the following. The verification of disability form that Jenny just talked about on our last slide is available on our website. It has to be filled out by a provider who is licensed to diagnose and treat the condition. So if you have someone who has, let's say, a disability because they have chronic spinal disease, that person should be going to a medical doctor because that is the person who will be licensed to diagnose and treat the condition. They wouldn't go to a social worker or other person who wasn't qualified to speak directly to their disabling condition. If a person has a mental health condition, they would be going to, could be a medical doctor, could be a psychiatrist, could be a licensed social worker or other licensed practitioner who, New York State says you are licensed to diagnose and treat this condition. That's what we're looking for. You can also utilize a Social Security award letter. This is an award letter from the Social Security Administration saying that the client is receiving benefits due to a specified disability. You'll notice as you work with the Social Security Administration, there's two versions of letters that they will send out. One just has the dollar amount that the client receives. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for the letter that has their documented disability, the diagnosis showing on the letter, the why of why they are receiving Social Security payments. So you can also utilize the client's SPOA application. If the client has a SPOA application because their documentable disability is a mental health or substance use disability, that is going to be included in the SPOA application, and therefore the SPOA application can be used to verify their disability for the purposes of housing. HUD will accept that. The other thing that is more rare, but sometimes we do see, is the SHAC, the Single Homeless Assessment Center, when your clients go to the grassland shelter and get evaluated by SHAC. This document can be used when it contains the HUD approved language on the verification of disability form. So it has to be that HUD conforming language where the condition is disabling, it will continue for an indefinite period of time, and it will be, the client's quality of life will be improved by stabilized housing. So that's really what we're looking for. Any four of these, any one of these four. You don't have to duplicate effort. You can be smart and strategic about how you gain this information.
Now let's discuss how we prioritize the most vulnerable clients for housing. Clients are listed on the coordinated entry prioritization list by the number of months homeless and their chat scores. This list is automatically generated in HMIS and can be sorted by the length of time homeless, chat scores, disability, family size, and other eligibility factors. Next slide. When a referral is made by the coordinated entry administrator, The administrator will send an email to both the housing provider and the CE assessor. This email is to alert both parties to work in partnership in order to assist the client in obtaining suitable housing as soon as possible. Next slide.
All of these requirements for coordinated entry are actuated, only happen when the coordinated assessor at every access point makes them happen. So we're going to, for a few slides, discuss all of the key tasks that are performed by the named coordinated entry assessor at each site. The coordinated entry assessor provides the client, has the client sign an HMIS release, which allows the client's information to be entered into our HMIS software client track and shared across all agencies in our system. The client is given a coordinated entry receipt and an information sheet about coordinated entry so that the client understands what to expect as the process proceeds and what to expect after they get a referral and move closer to getting permanent housing. The client is enrolled by the coordinated entry assessor into coordinated entry in HMIS, and part of that process that we discussed is completing a chat homeless assessment. If the client has any disabilities, as Allison and Jenny discussed, those disabilities must be documented and the documentation uploaded into client track so that all agencies can view it. And also, as part of enrollment into coordinated entry, the number of months homeless at time of in the last 3 years, at the time that the person is enrolled into coordinated entry, is entered into client track. Next slide. As we've mentioned, the number of months homeless is one of the 2 primary factors that is used to prioritize clients for housing referrals. And so it is essential that the number of months homeless is correct when entered by the coordinated entry assessor. Fortunately, that task is made easier by client track, our HMIS software, auto-calculating the number of months homeless based on all of the previous entries into client track. As part of the coordinated entry enrollment process, there is a field to enter the number of months homeless, and client track displays the auto-calculated value right above that field. That number that is entered into the field by the coordinated entry assessor must always equal the auto-calculated value. That takes into account all prior homeless episodes, shelter stays, outreach contacts, self-certifications in our system. And so it is correct unless there is missing data. If that number is not correct, because you as the coordinated entry assessor know that there are missing episodes, that there is missing information, you must take the steps to correct that number so that the number is correct and you can then enter the correct number into the field. But either the number is correct in the first place, and so you enter that number, or you correct that number when it is missing episodes and then enter the new value, which will be correct. When, in order to correct that number, as Daniel Gore will discuss in more detail shortly, you can create a new homeless episode, either a out of HMIS shelter stay or such as a stay in a shelter in the Bronx, or North Carolina, or a street homelessness episode that was not documented by a HMIS participating outreach team, on the client services screen in HMIS, when you do create those additional homeless episodes on the client services screen, you must upload supporting documentation. Once you have entered that episode, the auto-calculated value will change according to that adding in that new episode, and then you can record the new value of number of months homeless, matching that new number in the coordinated entry number of months homeless field. Next slide. Here are two examples of that process happening. When entering a new client into coordinated entry, the system auto-calculates 9 months homelessness, but the coordinated entry assessor knows that that does not take into account, does not include 4 months of street homelessness that has been documented by a letter from either a homeless outreach worker who does not use HMIS, or a police officer, or a property owner, a store owner where the person was sleeping. The coordinated entry assessor would therefore go to the client services screen and create a new street homeless episode of 4 months duration. Also upload the letter documenting that 4 months of street homelessness into the system. Once that's done, the auto calculation will now show 13 months, the 9 original months from all of the other shelter stays already in the system, and now the 4 months from the new street homeless episode just created. And the coordinated entry assessor can enter 13 months into the number of homeless field, equaling the now correct auto calculation. A slightly different example is where the client says that they were on the streets for 4 months. That's slightly different because HUD mandates that a client can only self-certify their homelessness for a maximum of 3 months. So in this situation where there are 9 months auto-calculated, but 4 months of self-certified homelessness, we would create a new street homeless episode of only 3 months duration, because that's the maximum that can be self-certified. Upload the self-certification into HMIS as well. Now the auto calculation will equal 12, the 9 months that were there originally, plus the 3 months from self-certification, the new episode that was just entered, and the coordinated entry assessor can enter 12 months into the number of homeless field, equaling the now corrected auto calculation of 12. Next slide.
So at this point, you've gone through the process of accessing coordinated entry, you have uploaded all your documentation, and you've gotten to the point where you've received a referral, but you're not finished yet. You're now responsible for connecting your client to housing after the referral has been received. You are responsible for arranging the meeting between your client and the housing provider, providing any additional documentation the housing staff might need on behalf of your client. And the biggest point I want to make here is that you need to maintain contact with the housing provider throughout the entire process. This is a huge responsibility for you to uphold because you are responsible for your client throughout this process. You are the main link between your client and the housing provider. You're their biggest and oftentimes their only advocate. And most of our clients have no idea how to go about navigating our system, and this is why you are the key to them achieving housing. Next slide, please. So another part of advocating for your client is speaking up on their behalf, and your chance to do so is at our circ meetings. As the link connecting your client to the housing provider, you must attend all circ meetings. These meetings have lists with the names of all individuals who have been enrolled in coordinated entry by you, and will give you the opportunity to connect with the housing provider on behalf of your client once they have been referred. And I highly encourage all of you to take advantage of these meetings, because sometimes we can lose communication with each other, things happen, but you're sure to see your client's housing provider and caseworker at these meetings. On this slide, we have the link to the circ rapid rehousing work group, as well as the permanent supportive housing work group. Next slide. This brings us to the end of the first half of our coordinated entry training. We will allow time for questions now before Daniel Gore walks you through HMIS.
In this demonstration, I'm going to enter my client Sherlock Holmes into coordinated entry. Along the way, I'll highlight important information as well as how to enter a cart or a chat, depending on whether you're working with a client who is at risk of homelessness, in which case they would receive a cart, or clients who are experiencing homelessness, in which case they would receive a chat. To get started, I have my client already on my screen. When I look at the dashboard, I see there is no active enrollment in coordinated entry, even though there is one from a couple years ago. What this tells me is I need to go to intake and select coordinated entry. I'll use this current client for the intake and review the information I have on the screen, update anything that needs to be updated. You will notice there has been a recent update to the release of information. This is now a drop-down list to correspond to whether the client has consented to share information or whether their program-related records need to be restricted to just your organization. You can always go back in and edit this if the client later chooses to consent. However, what will always be shared between providers is the client's profile or their basic information that you see on this screen. I'll click Finish and proceed to the next screen, which is where, if this client was a family, I would enter in those additional family members on this screen. I do want to highlight that when you select a blank row to enter the family member, you do need to scroll all the way over to the right to enter their information, including whether or not they have consented to share their information. I'll uncheck that for now and just click Save and Close. At this point, I select coordinated entry as the project for this client to enroll into. I'll select Today. I'll leave myself as a case manager, though this can be changed very easily by clicking on the magnifying glass and looking for another case manager or equivalent at your organization. I'll click Save. And now we start to get into the meat of the assessment. At this point, we show you whether or not the client has any previous episodes of homelessness documented in HMIS. We do see that this client has some homeless history going back over the years, including an outreach contact, a 2-month stay roughly in an emergency shelter. For purposes of the coordinated entry assessment, we're really focused on the last 3 years of the client's living situation and any experiences they have with homelessness. If you see anything missing within this recent 3-year period, you have the option as an assessor to add additional street episodes or shelter episodes. When you do record those, they need to be accompanied with documentation. So for example, I select here to record an additional episode of shelter homelessness that doesn't appear in HMIS. So I select certification of sheltered homelessness. I'm tying that to the coordinated entry, enrollment, and we differentiate between emergency shelter where you have third-party certification as well as institutional stays with third-party documentation where that was less than 90 days. I'll select emergency shelter, and I'll say that that episode began in January, and it has extended up until this very day. So that is the end date. I'll click save. And I now see there is that episode. I can easily click on the edit to go back and change those dates if I need to. And the assessor can do that, as well as, and this is very important, upload supporting documentation, which is being covered in this training in depth. If I click upload supporting documentation, a pop-up form appears, and I can select what I need to document from this list. And choose a file to upload. I won't choose a file to upload, but I will say that I have the documentation for now. And click save. I don't have anything else to record here. If I did need to record any additional episodes, I could do that again with these top buttons. Street episode, very similar to what we just saw. You can indicate by selecting street episode. And if you have third-party certification or self-certification, that's an important distinction. There is a limit on how many of these can be recorded over any given period of time. That would be up to 3 self-certifications or 3 months worth of self-certification. This client does pass that right here. And if I click on that link under where it says pass, I can see how that's being evaluated. And it says here that there have not been any certifications in the last 3 years. And of what has been recorded, it is less than 3 months, which is the max. So I was allowed to record this. I'll click save, and I'll just go ahead and add that to the homeless history for a demonstration. And now that I'm ready, I'll click finish. So here's a universal data assessment that everyone's familiar with. For our demo, I will indicate that the client is disabled, meaning a chronic long-term condition. By indicating this, I am preparing to go into more detail here by identifying a specific condition and provide the necessary documentation. If you don't have that information yet, documented disability information, you should select no. We're focusing here on what can be documented and verified. Housing status. This client is homeless. And here is the short list of the different homeless situations. I'll say the client's is staying in an emergency shelter. So I do want to highlight that we're looking here at answering specifically what is the client's current living situation. They are homeless, they are living in a shelter, and they've been there for more than a month but less than 90 days. In this case, I actually believe what I recorded earlier was more than 90 days, so I'll change that. When you're doing a coordinated entry for a client who is in your shelter program, you want to make sure that the date on the enrollment and all the assessment dates match up with the date that they arrived and the date that is the start of their shelter enrollment or their outreach enrollment. It's always best practice to line those up. There are some instructions here regarding the next set of questions. This following information that we answer should be verified using what's been recorded in HMIS. The total number of months you enter must equal the system generated number. And if that number is incorrect, we can go back and fix that. So that's very important to know. If you get to this point and that number is incorrect, go back to homeless history and add additional episodes or correct the episodes that you see in order to make that number accurately reflect the client's total months homeless in the past 3 years. Approximate date this episode of homelessness started. I'll go back to the 1st of January. Number, regardless of where they stayed last night, the number of times they've been on the streets in the past 3 years. So we're talking about perhaps different episodes of homelessness they've had. I'll record 2 based on the information I saw earlier. And over the 3 years, again, we want these 2 numbers to match, so I'll just go down here and select 5 to match the system generated number. Insurance coverage, I'll just select no for now and click save. Like I said, I recorded earlier that this client is disabled. Now I need to indicate which specific disability or disabilities the client has. I'll go ahead and record 2. I'll say that yes to mental health disorder. Yes, it is indefinite or long term. Same thing with the physical disability. I'll click save and close, and I'll have an opportunity to upload the documentation a little later. Domestic violence. I'll go ahead and say that yes, this client has been a victim of domestic violence. So that's a pretty broad question. Have they ever been a victim of domestic violence? Yes or no? If yes, when did that experience occur? I'll go ahead and say that was over a year ago, and that they are not currently fleeing. This is important because when it comes to the cart and the chat, there is some scoring that is dependent on how you answer these questions, so you really need to have this information entered accurately. I'll click save and proceed to the financial assessment. And like with any assessment that you do in HMIS, if the client has any assessment history, you can click default last assessment and pull in information. And then you can update this as needed. I'll leave it as is. No income, no non-cash benefits. And click save and close. The education question is just for clients experiencing homelessness. So for your prevention clients, you won't see this. I'll click save. And now we are at the point where the system has prompted me to complete a chat for this client. The reason it's prompting me to do this is because earlier I did indicate that this client is currently in a homeless situation, and because of that answer I gave, I'm being presented with the chat. If you get to this point and you realize that was a mistake, you can go back. We've made some recent modifications to the workflow logic to allow you to make these changes on the fly instead of having to save and close the workflow and then go back to edit. So it's very easy now to go back to your very first assessment under universal data, and if you need to, you can change this to at risk of homelessness. Select obviously a different sort of housing situation for your client. In this case, I'll say rental by client, or they have not been there for less than a week. They've in fact been there for 90 days or more. Everything else I'll leave the same, and then the system will take us back to where we left off, and instead of doing a chat, you see now we're doing a cart. And at the top here it clearly says this is to prioritize clients for homeless prevention assistance. I'll go ahead and complete a cart now. So as I scroll down, we'll see that information that I entered earlier has been pulled into this assessment. There are questions that are blank, and I need to answer those. It's best to enter everything that is being asked for. That way the score is complete and accurate. Did the client lose income in the last 9 months that they never got back? I'll go and just say no. Monthly income is 0. I'll continue to scroll down. Do you currently have any rental housing subsidies such as Section 8? I'll say no. How many times have you moved in the past 12 months? I will say 2. And of those 2 times, how many in the last 2 months? I'll go ahead and say 1 time in the last 2 months. There's a deadline to leave current housing, and I will say there are 3 days to move out. Next up are the rehousing challenge questions. How many times have you been evicted in the last 24 months? I will say 1 time. When it comes to criminal history, I will say no. And when it comes to debt, I will say $500 in monthly debt payments. Several of these next high-risk questions have already been answered based on our earlier answers to assessments. Though I do need to answer this question about living in an overcrowded situation, which I will say yes to. As you may have just noticed, as I answered that question, the score changed. And this happens as you're answering the cart or the chat. It is scoring in real time, and as soon as you click save, that score is submitted and will appear on the prioritization list. So if you get to the bottom and this doesn't seem right to you based on your understanding, definitely scroll back up, review this information, and if you still have questions, you're welcome to leave a comment here, which the coordinated entry team at DSS will see. I'll click save. Now I'm under the documentation step. I see with my dummy client here I have uploaded or provided documentation before. If there's anything missing that you need to provide, you can easily go in here to add a new document, or a quick document check very conveniently shows you a long list of possible documentation items that you may need to upload. So, for example, disability, I forgot to include that earlier. I can go ahead and select that from the list, upload, and save and close. And when I go back here, we'll see disability is now included among the other documentation items. I'm going to click finish, and it takes us to the COVID-19 risk assessment. For now, I will click no, not at this time, and that is the conclusion of the workflow. It takes us back to the dashboard where we see the client is now enrolled in coordinated entry. And if there's anything I need to review, I can always edit the coordinated entry enrollment, which will take me from the very first step that we just did to the very last. If I want to review something specifically, I can go to View Entry Assessments and say pull up the cart that I just recorded, or pull up the financials. Best practice would be, if you believe you made a mistake when you entered someone into coordinated entry, best practice is to click Edit Coordinated Entry and go through it from start to finish, because there is quite a bit of conditional logic and scoring that happens related to various questions throughout the coordinated entry workflow. So if something does need to be changed, I do recommend you click Edit Coordinated Entry. If it's a matter of new information coming to light, you can always add housing needs, where you can record a new chat or cart. You can add the COVID-19 risk. You can add family members to the enrollment. Housing navigation is done at DSS by the coordinated entry team. That's the referral and exit component to coordinated entry. And for now, what I want to show you is how I would add to an existing coordinated entry a new housing needs assessment. So I'm going to click on that button and just quickly review. Yes, this is the same information for the client, no changes here. I have an opportunity here to add more homeless history if needed. Click Finish. There isn't anything here that I need to change. However, if there was some new information about health insurance, that could be updated. And then this is very important. This is where you're indicating what the client's current living situation is at this point in time. So as a client is in coordinated entry, perhaps for weeks, months, or even years, they may be assessed and their living situation may be different at various points in time. So we'll say for our demonstration that the client at this point is in a homeless situation. We need to do a chat for this client. So I just selected place not meant for habitation, and I'm going to click Save. Barriers come up again, but I don't need to change anything. Domestic violence comes up again, and it would be a good idea to review this, and if there's anything you need to change, you can do that. Same thing with financial. In this case, I will add some income. I will select yes. I will add $1,000 in income just so that we can see what happens on the assessment. Click Save and Close, and now we're doing a chat. And that's because our current living situation is a homeless situation. And as I scroll down, you'll see the chat that you're all familiar with, how information is being pulled in automatically to several of the questions. And we do have a preliminary score, but of course that changes as you complete the assessment. And when you're done with the assessment, of course, you click Save, review documentation as we covered before, and enter COVID risk if you need to. And again, at this point, I will say not at this time. And then click on Finish. So we've recorded a lot of information on this client related to coordinated entry. The actions that you can take regarding someone's participation in coordinated entry, that can be done right from the enrollment record, where you can review quite a bit of information. And additional information can be found here under assessment. So over time, a client may have several carts or several chats entered. You can always go in to view that full assessment history underneath the assessments folder and just click on what you want to see. So if I click on chat, I will see the one that I just created, and I can see any that were previously done and what their status is. In this case, there was one done a few years ago, which has expired. That covers this portion of the training. I look forward to any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thanks for that walkthrough, Daniel. So all of the materials related to coordinated entry can be accessed on our website, which is wcochomeless.org/coordinated entry. Our calendar is on the website. All of the subcommittees of the COC, all of the participating organizations in the COC, as well as data from all of our reporting to HUD and various efforts such as the PIT count can all be found on our website. So please utilize this resource. This training will be available on our website as well. Your COC admin team includes the coordinated entry group of Jo Marie Terhune, coordinated entry administrator, Latanya Rosado, social caseworker, Allison McSpadden, systems manager, Carl Bertrand, your COC board co-chair, Craig Wong, your COC board co-chair, Yoav Spiegel, your DCMH program specialist, Jenny Badri, planning associate, and Daniel Gore, your HMIS administrator. And this slide gives you the email address of how to reach each one of us. We're all happy to take your questions at any time. We're here to support you in doing the best job you can as a coordinated entry assessor. Thanks for joining us.